that in the next 10 minutes, okay, looking at our major subdivisions of the globe in terms of the animals, plants, and other organisms that live there. We then need to go back to the bottom end of the hierarchy and consider how we study in their natural environments everything from individual organisms up to the populations that they would exist in. In other words, all the individuals of the same species in an area, and then communities and then ecosystems, and back up to the globe again. Okay? Dr. Constable may have already told you, ecology of all of the subdivisions of the biological sciences is the most mathematical. Okay? It requires the greatest amount of mathematical rigor, okay, and a lot of what the derivations, particularly in population dynamics, are all built around differential calculus. Okay, that's how, which is why biology majors have to take calculus to be able to understand those. Okay? And it was also the discipline that uses statistics with much greater regularity and much greater depth than any of the other disciplines. Okay? In many ways, it's also the most challenging of the subdisciplines because you're dealing with multiple possible interactions, both biological and abiotic, between living organisms, and there are so many possible variables. Teasing out which and who and what is affecting who is an extremely challenging adventure. So, we're going to quickly look at all of the various, what we refer to as biomes, the different organismal types around the globe that we recognize and subdivide into major groups. So, as far as I'm aware, this is the last slide Dr. Constable was looking at, the interface between terrestrial and aquatic habitats. And there are a variety of places where we have interactions there. The most notable one are what we refer to as wetlands, which are areas where terrestrial begins to transition into aquatic habitat. So we're looking at things like areas along rivers, we're looking at estuaries. And it is a truism that globally humans have drained probably in excess of 95% of all of the wetlands that would otherwise exist. And we've primarily drained them to turn them into either agricultural land, okay, or into habitation. So, for instance, if you take the city of San Francisco, about 1/2 of what we see as San Francisco, and this would be true of Boston too, is actually landfill. It's material that we put in garbage to reclaim wetlands and enable us to put dwellings on it. Okay? And you can actually look at that historically by looking at old maps of Boston and San Francisco and places and see what was land and what was wetland previously. So, for instance, who's flown into San Francisco Airport? Okay. You know, that's the one where it looks like you're about to land in the water until the last minute, right? Okay. That whole area would have originally just been boggy, marsh-like wetland that's been filled in accordingly. So, okay, let's think about tropical forests. Okay. With the exception of the coastal marine environment, tropical forests are the most biodiverse and productive environments on Earth. Okay. They are defined, like so many of these other major parts of the globe, by a combination typically of temperature, okay, and rainfall. Temperature and precipitation coupled together, okay, also coupled with elevation and topography, right? Topography meaning what is the lay of the land, okay, how many hills, etc. On the note of topography, I think I may have mentioned this before, the state of Kansas is in actual fact flatter than a pancake. Okay? Because the biologists actually baked up a batch of pancakes and then measured all the little flips and wibbles there are on a typical pancake, and that's actually more than there are proportionally on Kansas. Okay, so we think about tropical forests, temperature, rainfall, always remember those two. It's those two factors, for instance, that naturally Fresno, right here, is just on the other side of being a genuine desert. Okay? Deserts are normally defined, as we've shown, by less than 25 centimetres of rainfall a year, which is about 10 inches. Fresno's annual rainfall is somewhere between 11 and 12 inches. So, you know, just a little bit less will be a desert. Bakersfield is a desert, okay, naturally speaking. So, we're looking at elevation, topography, we're looking at seasonality. Okay? There are seasonal changes. Okay? The actual structure of the vegetation, okay? What the structure of that vegetation will dictate it. What's happening with the soil, okay? What's cycling through the soil in terms of nutrients, and how fragile it is, and of course one of the critical factors where we stand now with almost 7 billion humans on the planet is what is the human use pattern of this particular environment. So forests are definitely the most biodiverse. There's probably more different sorts of living organism in 1 hectare of tropical forest than there is in the whole of North America. They're that rich in terms of biodiversity. So here is a rough distribution of the major terrestrial biomes. They're subdividable into greater or lesser amounts. So let's look at some generalities. One thing you immediately notice about the structure of the globe, even in a projection like this, is in terms of land area, terrestrial, the Earth is top-heavy. Okay? Most of the continental land masses above sea level are predominantly in the northern hemisphere. Okay? Relatively fewer amounts below that. So if you look at the amount of land below 30 degrees south in latitude, and compare that with the amount of land above 30 degrees north, it's enormously different. Okay? So there's an inequity, except we do have a massive continent on the southern end of the globe down here, which is relatively low in biodiversity because it's colder than sea. Okay? Anyway, let's look at the distributions. Okay? Take the yellow to begin with, desert. Okay? The deserts of the world are primarily clustered, although not entirely, okay, within 30 degrees either side of the equator. There are variations in that, and it's not coincidental, and it relates back to some of those global circulation patterns, both currents and atmospheric patterns that dictate where rainfall occurs accordingly. Some of these deserts are extremely large. The Sahara Desert in North Africa, even though this projection doesn't show it because this is a Mercator projection that spreads out the continents in the northern hemisphere and makes them look bigger than they really are. Okay? The Sahara Desert can take all of the 48 contiguous United States and pop it in there and lose it. Okay? With space to spare. It's approximately 4,000 miles across from the eastern to the western side of Africa. Okay? We've got other deserts that occur in Asia. Okay? Half of Australia is a desert, and of course in the southwestern United States we have some fairly substantial deserts, and then there are a few other varieties. Savanna is essentially tropical grassland. Okay? So it occurs in those areas. Tropical forests, okay, occur in a blanket across the globe, primarily either side of the equator, and it relates again to these rainfall and temperature patterns. And then we've got coniferous forests, which we already know from doing gymnosperms, right, occurs in this great big swathe across the entire northern hemisphere primarily, all the way across Eurasia and across North America, and if we didn't cut them down and uninterrupted. Okay? And so these subdivisions of our major biomes around the world have been established and known for a lot more than 100 years. Okay? Our understanding of what constitutes the climax community, and they are largely dictated by the vegetation, which is dependent upon those factors. So if you put it all together, okay, these are all the determinant factors that establish where things live on planet Earth. Okay? It is a coupling of those latitudinally driven Hadley cells, which is the vertical circulation of air masses within different boundaries of latitude on the face of the planet, also coupled with how moisture ascends. So it's a truism, for instance, that a lot of the moisture that descends in the tropics is actually ascending in the tropics too, because the evapotranspiration rate, the loss of water either from standing bodies of water and or transpiration from the plants there, causes a lot of moisture to ascend into the atmosphere, which then condenses in clouds and ultimately comes back down again in essentially the same